Hello, everyone, from a very beautiful morning in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation, where we are going to talk about the myth of experience. And before we start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Mert, and I am an account manager in the local services team based out in Mountain View. Today, we are welcoming Emre Soyer to discuss his book, The Myth of Experience, Why We Learn the Wrong Lessons and Ways to Correct Them. That's his book. And Emre is a behavioral scientist, and he's a consultant, and he's been partnering up with many different organizations, schools, several different institutions to help them with creative and strategic decision-making processes. So now I will have Emre join us. And how are you doing, Emre?
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Yeah, of course.
Nice to see you. Very nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I know you're based in Istanbul. I know it's late time there. And I know we have many participants joining us from all over the world at different Google offices or probably working from home. So I will actually let you take over the conversation from here. I know you have a very entertaining and interesting presentation style. So I'm confident that everyone will leave this conversation with a lot of different takeaways and action items. So
way to increase the expectations, man. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's nice to be here. I hope I could see you. I can't see you. I hope you can, though, see me and hear me and understand most of the words I'm saying right now. Otherwise, this would be very awkward. So what I will do is I would like to share some ideas with you using some visuals in the first part of this session, and then we will open things to discussion. I hope that's all right with you. So I'm going to go to my slides. And you should be able to see Hippocrates now. Because I would like to take you back in time, 2,400 years or so back in time to Hippocrates, you know, the man with the oath. And he said great many things, but his first and most famous, arguably, aphorism was this. Perhaps you know it. Life is short, art long, opportunity fleeting, experience deceptive, decision difficult. So I'd like to highlight this part, experience deceptive, because he warned us. He said, look, we're going to make a lot of decisions, some more important than others, in medicine and beyond. And we're going to rely on our experience to improve our decision-making, but experience can be deceptive on that problem, the myth of experience. We argue that it's a myth that experience is always a great teacher. We may assume that it is, but it is not. Quite unexpectedly, it can in fact reinforce mistakes rather than eliminating them. And it can also prevent us from adapting to new situations when we really need. So we wrote this with Robin. You can see us here not socially distancing and without a mask, because this was years ago, pre-COVID days. And Robin Hogarth is a founder of the genre, of the field of judgment and decision-making. His research spans over decades. I entered that domain more recently. It's an honor, it's a pleasure for me to be able to represent him and our ideas here today. Having said that, why should we care? What's the deal? The deal is decision-making. So think about how many decisions do you make in a day. Every day, all day, we make decisions. It's the building block of what we see around us. They can make us, they can break us. Because we make decisions every day, all day, we kind of take for granted all that goes on behind the scenes. There is a lot going on there without having us thinking about it. For example, the way we learn from experience, it just happens. It's very automatic. We don't have to think about it. We intuit all the time. We cooperate, we create. All of these are, by the way, intertwined and affected by uncertainty. And perhaps for that reason, because decisions are important for us, we have to maybe look into them. And I'd like to, of course, put my put my attention to experience here much more than others. And we have a positive connotation about experience, and I want to kind of challenge that a bit, and I want to kind of put some nuance on that. Because we think the more the better experience, the knowledge that skills we gain by participating in or observing events within our environment. It is an automatic teacher that kind of seamlessly feeds our intuition. It regulates our preferences. It affects our judgments, decisions. It is very personal to us. And the knowledge and skills we gain are very durable. Think about, riding a bicycle. It's very difficult to unlearn those kind of physical skills and such also conceptual knowledge we gain from experience. So we have to be extra careful. We have to distinguish when it teaches us the right lessons and when it may fail to do so. And for it to represent the reality of the situation to us, two things need to happen. We need to receive accurate, abundant, immediate feedback to our decisions. Quite obvious. This is necessary, not sufficient, because what we learn needs to stay relevant. So situation and rules need to stay stable. This is what we call a kind learning environment. In kind learning environments, experience is always a friend. Example, tennis. I don't know if you ever played tennis or watched tennis, but when you go on the court, you can imagine that you always get high quality feedback. You may not be a champion, it's very complex, uncertain, yes, but again, experience is a friend. We receive accurate, abundant, immediate feedback. The situation, the way the gravity operates, the size of the court, the weight of the ball don't change from today to tomorrow. So experience is kind to us. We go outside of the tennis court, things can change dramatically. The feedback we get is no longer guaranteed to be high quality. We may get biased, incomplete, irrelevant, delayed, probabilistic, fake feedback. We may not know which one we're getting, and rules are complex, uncertain, unstable. Look at COVID-19 and how our lives are very different. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the crux of the problem. This is a wicked learning environment, and we don't necessarily know where we are in this kind of continuum, kind versus wicked. We don't have to, we just learn from experience. But once we realize how and in which ways wicked our learning is, it's much easier to learn the right lessons from experience. And we do work with wicked learning environments all the time. Our work environment, our social environment, the disasters we have to deal with, they are all cases of different wickedness, and we have been writing about this with Robin beyond academia, how managers can be fooled by their experience in different ways. And now we kind of tackle all these different subjects, causality, creativity, survival, that a decision maker may care about, and where experience has lots of kind of different ways in which it is a kind of a trickster rather than a teacher without our awareness. So the solution is not to ignore experience. It's to have a healthy and timely skepticism toward it, to improve our learning and ultimately our decisions. So when we learn from experience, we should consider its lessons as, theories, so that we can scrutinize further, especially when there's a lot at stake, rather than truths that we blindly follow automatically. So I will present 3 ideas from those different notions, and I will try to kind of introduce 3 different types of wickedness to you, and that will hopefully lead to a healthy discussion, and more ideas will hopefully be generated in your mind about how we learn and how we make decisions. So I hope this is so far so good. We will now go down the rabbit hole with creativity. Experience is essential for creativity, no doubt about that. And creativity is essential for all sorts of things, like innovation, negotiation. We need to find win-win solutions. Also problem solving, survival as well. What's the problem? Well, there are many problems, but one of those is that experience leads to better focus, competence, and expertise. And on its face, this is not an issue, especially in kind learning environments. And that's where the distinction is important, because what if what we learn, we're expert on based on our experience, is disrupted and suddenly becomes obsolete? So in complex and evolving situations, experience can actually limit our creativity in elusive ways. It can trap us in a know-how that is no longer relevant. So we may not be able to identify problems or generate solutions as fast and as well as we wish. I'll show you several examples, but before I do so, I'd like to show you something that you know. I hope you know this. That is why I'm showing it to you. I hope you've seen this hundreds of times before. I have. This is one of the most famous visual illusions, Müller-Lyer illusion. And the issue here is that the second, to me, still, after so many times, looks slightly longer, the second horizontal line, because of those spikes that create the illusion. But I know better. You know, I've seen this before. I have experience. These are actually the same size, the horizontal lines. Are they, though? So because I changed it, this is the analogy of experience. The top one is actually 15% or so longer. But because I was so familiar with it, I was blind to this change. And that's the notion I'd like to bring. That's the analogy of experience. We learn from past and present, given by definition, and use that to understand what future may hold. Great, very healthy. In kind learning environments, because what if this gets disrupted? What if our experience, the past and present, does not represent the future? What if there's a break? So experience can blind us in these situations, and it has also in COVID-19. So in lots of disasters, this happens actually. So the best thing would be that if we had never experienced this disaster, this coronavirus pandemic, of course. But given that we are experiencing it, let us please learn the right lessons, because it is not really guaranteed that we would. And one thing to notice is that rare events are not really that rare across many domains, and that they have a weird kind of way of progressing. They go zero for a very long time. That's why they're rare. They go zero. They don't exist for a very long time. And then when they start, like in the case of COVID-19, they may have this slow start in the big picture of things, linear start that make us learn from them and kind of slow us down, blind us towards what may actually happen, which is this. So it may stop at our tracks, and it is very difficult to identify these problems based on the lessons of experience. This is important to know because there may be others lurking in the shadows. Like, what about this one? You know, if CO2 emissions are growing like this, could it be that something is brewing beyond our experience? We're not experiencing it yet, but it may lead to something that we wish not to experience. This is the way maybe to look at these issues. Like, what if this forecast is correct about the way we use antibiotics? If this is correct, could it be that this is growing into something, even if we're not experiencing the issue? If we think like this, we may have a better grasp of certain problems, and then we can decide whether to act or not to act and how to act. I can give you an example of a kind of a success story in this. We've done something quite remarkable in 1980s. We looked at a problem that hadn't yet caused a kind of a catastrophe. We hadn't experienced a huge problem, but we saw something growing non-linearly, quite kind of steep. And then we decided to curb it. Ozone depleting substance emissions. We shook hands across the globe, every country, starting from 1988 Montreal Protocol. And we now kind of curb that, and the ozone is healing, and we don't experience the problem that we might have experienced. So this is great news. Another problem is disasters are not the only things that grow like this. Ideas grow like this too. These ideas and many others grow kind of non-linearly, and that is why we have a very hard time judging them and judging their potential, especially at the beginning. All these ideas and many others have been rejected by people with lots of experience in their beginnings. These people stood to make fortunes out of these, and they couldn't judge their potential correctly, because the more groundbreaking an idea, the more it breaks the ground, the very ground on which that experience is built. So it's going to be very difficult to foresee them, including the people who actually built some of these ideas. People underestimate. We're worse judges of ideas than we think we are. So what is the solution to all this? Well, diversifying experience in an insightful way, if we can. That's why we can kind of get contributions from different ideas, and we can maybe foresee these or understand these better, go beyond one person's experience. Unfortunately, we strictly optimize based on recent experience when we build businesses, when we build any kind of structure, which makes sense for the short term, but these are fragile under any kind of nonlinear change. So we argue that we could have some small amount of excess, not a revolution in the way we do business, but a small excess, a collaborative problem identification and solution generation platform within our established optimized structures. And we've done this. I can give you an example. We've operationalized this idea in a notion called the Senate of Managers. What we did was we entered certain companies, like large companies, mid-sized companies, and we asked mid to high managers. And we created a small Senate from them, 5 to 8 of them. We asked them to meet in a room with us 2 hours every 2 weeks. Not top management though, not new management either, mid to high management. These people know the company inside out. They have an extensive experience on their kind of subject. They're kind of stuck in that they don't have time. They want to grow, they want to go up in the ladder, but there's not much space. But they have lots of insights, problems, threats, opportunities that they see. So we ask them to talk about those threats, ideas, potential opportunities to each other in quite open ways and kind of using a protocol. And the others had to think about them and come back and add to those ideas. So it was kind of a diversified experience at a very kind of healthy level of the company, which then we reported back to top management. And the top management decided what to do with these ideas and reverted back. So this is what we can do without changing 95% of what we do in business today, but we can be less fragile to these changes. This is the first idea, experience creating expertise that leads to some kind of blindness under change. The second idea is quite different, but this is one kind of wickedness. So let's change gear to influence. Influence is about the control we have, or the lack thereof, on our decisions. What's the problem? The problem is increasing complexity in the way we do business, in the way we communicate, and advances in technology constantly require an improved user, customer, employee experience. You know, if I want to use this device, I need to have some kind of design so this makes it accessible to me so I can experience the world inside of it. Great. If I'm working for a large company, I need to be able to understand the KPIs, the career paths, different type of promotional schemes that I have so that I behave accordingly. That's the employee experience. And that's where experience design comes in. So we use lots of behavioral science, other scientific findings, and big data to optimize these designs, essential for us, but they influence our decisions in quite subtle ways. They control our decisions in ways while making us think in ways that we think that we are still in control. And what they do is they use kind of design features, certain anchors to lure our attention, like, you know, emotions, options, and contexts. You actually are quite knowledgeable about this. I mean, emotions are everywhere. This is the first kind of thing that we anchor on, we understand, and we immediately feel. So lots of processes around us, campaigns like marketing, also political campaigns have lots of emotions installed in them. So we kind of give attention. They try to lure their attention to where they would like us to pay attention. So I'm not going to stay on this too much, but I'd like to show you something beyond emotions, options. Let's say you have 3 choices of flowers that you want to take to your friend as you go to dinner to their house. Of course, after COVID ends, obviously. And they're priced like this, 12, 18, 22. I ask my audiences when things are interactive, which one do you think is sold the most? Which one is the best seller? And which one would you get? And overwhelmingly, the majority guesses, predicts, and even chooses 18 because it's the middle option. And that's fine. What if I wanted to lure your attention towards 22? What could I do? Could I enrich your customer experience by adding another option here? Priced at $36, say. And suddenly now this becomes a different problem. 22 becomes the middle option, or one of them. And now I may think, you know, rationalize, if I'm paying 18, let me go 22. Whereas this sentiment did not exist before. So this is what I want to warn you against. Every company kind of does this a bit, and we kind of optimize using data, these numbers and these prices. But there are more elusive ways this plays a role in our lives, because in lots of companies there are meetings on strategies, and there are negotiations that go on about, you know, which strategy should we use? Should we go with the low risk, low return strategy, which we are quite familiar with? We do it right now, our status quo. Or should we consider this new strategy, higher return on average, but also higher risk? So This is a very healthy discussion, of course, but it may be an impasse. So in this process, someone unwillingly or willingly can bring another option into the mix, and which ends up being kind of high risk, mediocre return type of an issue, type of a design. And this option enriched my experience. There are more options now, but my control on this decision may be actually lower because the second one now looks much better than before. So this can be designed in a way to lure us us to certain options, and I wanted to warn you about this. But this can be used for good too. So there are nudges or choice architectures out there that you may be familiar with that make us vote. For example, this is Neat Street's project. This is the idea here is that you can vote with your cigarette butts, and so that instead of littering, the idea is that you'll compete with others in deciding who is the best player in the world here, but it can be another question. It works quite brilliantly. We also tried this in different ways. And this is fine. This is a kind of socially desirable outcome. But now we can also kind of go towards a more questionable practices of this. And this is all in the headlines now, how e-commerce sites, social media, tech giants, digital businesses kind of quote unquote manipulate or trick us into clicking this, that, and buying things that we don't want, and etc., or make us spend more. And this is the topic of social dilemma, which is also part of that documentary, in that there are good aspects, essential aspects of this design, this experience design, but there are also more darker, questionable aspects potentially. So as decision makers, what can we do? What's the solution for us? Experience design is essential. There is no way of ignoring that, in that we need these designs. We need to be these things, technologies, issues to be accessible to us. But it interferes with our perceptions and choices. So it becomes also more widespread, and with better data, with better findings, more effective. We can and should reclaim more control over our selected and important decisions. And we have two ideas for you. One, can we develop a design radar? In that when we go into a meticulously designed experience, can we, instead of going with the flow, especially for decisions that we care about or consequential choices, can we just think about who designed this? Why am I feeling like this? What is the consequences of that? Why do I have these choices, and how my attention is lured towards certain choices? What's the context here? And more importantly, what are the objectives of those who design my experience in this context? And are my objectives aligned with theirs? If there's not much of an alignment, maybe this is a wicked environment. And if there is an alignment, it is much kinder. So this is the first idea, to cut through some of those designs, being aware, so that the people will know that we're aware, so they will hopefully design better experiences. Less intrusive, more kind of accessible, etc. The second idea is, even before we go into these designs, could we think about our values and objectives so that we anchor on them? Even when we go inside these designs, we can kind of prioritize according to what we care about much more and what we aim and what our goals are, rather than the designer's goals. So this can cut through some of those outside influencers as well, as we would anchor firmly on our objectives. Influence, experience design, and the solutions could be design radar and objectives. So this is the second idea I'd like to kind of share with you. And the third idea is potentially a little bit weird, success, because I have no idea what success means for you. I also don't know what failure means to you. Nevertheless, in general, it makes sense to us to learn from our failures, however we may define them, and our mistakes. It seems also reasonable and quite fun to learn from successes, benchmark them, emulate them, to repeat what they've done. We'd argue that this is not enough. In fact, it can be quite deceptive, quite misleading to learn like this separately. We would need, in fact, to understand maybe what causes the difference between success and failure, again, however we may define them. Let me show you why. So consider any decision process, and we're trying to evaluate it, and there have been some successes. It can be sales, it can be employee performance beyond a certain threshold, whatever you like. And we have a majority of them were successful, congratulations. But some of them were failures, quite a few of them. how should we learn from them? First of all, success is what we aimed, and that's kind of where our goal and our job. So why fix something that isn't broken? So let's look at why we failed, the common elements of what went wrong. So we do an analysis, let's say, and we find out that most failures have squares in them, like some kind of a characteristic feature. They also have some circles and triangles. So ideally, if we get rid of them, we should be able to kind of get rid of some of those failures. It sounds like that, but I'd like to warn you against this, because there are at least 4 traps here, which are quite kind of elusive. One, what if many successes have all these things as well? By focusing mainly on failures, we will miss that notion. So we may actually get rid of something that either doesn't make any difference or actually might damage things further. What if also there's some elements, so this is the first trap. Second trap, what if there's an element in failures that is different than successes, indeed this plus, for example, but it gets drowned within all these other things that we found, so we don't eliminate it very clearly, or identify it very clearly and then manage to eliminate it on time. So that's the second trap. The third trap, you might guess, is that maybe successes have something that is quite different than failures. So focusing on failures, we may miss that. And fourth, and perhaps more important than the other ones, is that we may miss certain failures that are currently masquerading as successes. These may be some kind of successful outcomes that occurred because they got lucky, or worse, because there were some deceptions behind, and they will be failures down the road, giving us a huge headache, and we may not be able to learn from them by looking at our mistakes. So this is the traps of learning predominantly from mistakes, failures, and unfortunately the same is true, even worse, learning from successes. I'm saying unfortunately because it's fun to learn from successes, it's motivating, and I can show you an analogy. I mean, there are all sorts of lists of things most successful people do and have in common before breakfast, every day, in their 20s, Sunday nights, entrepreneurs, every night, every morning. So these are fun, but these may be very misleading for a variety of reasons. I can tell you immediately two. One, they generally don't define what success is. So even if we become successful, we may be quite regretful in that, or not happy in that we had to give up certain things for it, but that was not our success. So they may take success definition from outside. But more importantly, not so successful people who are not part of this analysis may also be doing these things, and that doesn't differentiate. So we may not be learning the right lessons. So in summary, intuitively we like learning from failure predominantly or success separately, but then we end up not acknowledging the gray area, which doesn't make much difference. Also, maybe worse, we don't acknowledge the shape of that gray area. What if there are lots of failures and small amount of successes with lots of commonalities with failures? That requires a much different strategy now than if we were doing separately. We were looking at them separately. So we wrote about this too in kind of short articles and lots of examples if you want to dig deeper into better learning from success and failure. So the solution involves not learning from failures or successes alone. That can be misleading. What we can do is we can analyze the difference using samples, representative samples of success and failure. This is akin to a kind of scientific method to better reveal potential causalities and also the role of uncertainty. And also we should maybe track that difference in time, because the difference between success and failure, however we may define it, can evolve in time. Experience can become obsolete. So when we work with decision makers and companies, we tell them, please get a working definition of success and failure. Don't be too vague about them, because we're going to have to learn. So that can change. It's a working definition. And then please let's check the processes regardless of the outcomes within those two categories. As representative sample. Actually doing this is much cheaper than doing separately. And then try to understand if there are causalities, if there's uncertainty, if there are deceptions as well that we need to kind of understand as we learn. So this is the third idea, and we talked about creativity, we talked about influence, we talked about success, different ways of wickedness, quite elusive ways experience can deceive us. Overall, the idea is not to ignore experience, but to learn from it carefully. If we understand the wicked kind of separation, it becomes much easier to come up with solutions and ways to learn the correct lessons. Otherwise, we may not even realize we actually have a problem, and we may keep kind of contaminating our intuition with distorted, biased experience. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. This was my slides. We can go to a Q&A. I will give the word to Mert.
Hello again. Looks like I'm back. Well, Emre, that was a really nice presentation, really nice conversation overall. So thank you again for joining our conversation today. And quite honestly, I had actually sat in Emre's workshops before, maybe in person several years ago, and you have made a lot of progress for sure.
Thank you. Absolutely. Good feedback. Good feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we will actually start accepting questions. But before we do that, I just want to touch on. I just want to make one comment, especially the part where you talked about those articles where the subject line is, 10 things you should do to become successful in your career, or 10 things you should do to get in shape. So before I met Emre, I was relatively a good follower of those advice. Trying to wake up early, maybe join the 5 a.m. wake up club, but not necessarily coming up with an amazing idea, or not getting this crazy promotion that I was supposed to get. So learning these insights that we get from experience and how they might deceive us, I think it's helped me a lot. So I'm hoping that it's gonna provide a lot of insights for a lot of different people with your book.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I would like to start with a warm-up question that I've written down that is ready to go. And then we can definitely start accepting some questions from the audience. And my first question is, so in the first chapter of the book, Emre, there's a section. It's a section called "Stories That Lie," and I wanna kind of talk about storytelling in this context. How does storytelling fit into the context of learning from experience? And how might storytelling lie? I know storytelling is a very effective way of influencing people. And what can we do about it? How can we, prepare us to get the right insights from storytellers?
All right. Good question, because it's actually quite parallel to what I've been talking about in the presentation. So storytelling is definitely a very powerful leadership and persuasion tool. No doubt about that. They're everywhere. They're in all TED Talks, all business books, all startup launches, product launches, and for good reason. They have amazing kind of advantages. And our experiences, the way we learn from experience, we storify things. Experiences become very kind of quickly, automatically storified, simplified into stories. This has amazing advantages because we understand our experiences much better. In that way, we can also remember them better. It's like a mnemonic device, and we can explain it to others better. So it kind of increases our collective experience, collective understanding. And we can also predict the future better. Like, we can use that story to extrapolate from it. And so huge advantages. And precisely because of that, like experience, we need to be maybe careful to have good stories, because stories can be misleading. They may not necessarily overtly lie, but here's one thing that can happen. For example, one aspect of storytelling, it has lots of hindsight buried in it. So a success or failure happens, and it becomes really obvious. Like, you can see the whole kind of line and then why it happened and write a story on it. But all that ambiguity, all that uncertainty in the different junctions of decisions, that kind of disappears, gets squashed. So success and failure seem much more deterministic, much more predictable based on stories. I would argue then, be a little bit skeptical of stories too, especially if you see these kind of things. And this is not even a lie, it can be accurate. It's accurate in hindsight. It's quite a kind of a subtle way of kind of maybe luring our decision towards things that are most important to the storyteller. But of course, we may care about the uncertainties too. So we argue in the book as well that we should also be story skeptics, in that to make stories better. So this is a pro-storytelling actually stance.
Yeah.
If you're a story skeptic, then the storyteller will know about it. So we will be looking for certain signals how stories can be misleading. So they will craft their stories better. So we will learn about the right things at the right time, and we will be better decision makers. So that's how it enters. So again, take stories as kind of things to be tested further, especially if you see these kind of signals where things are omitted, or there are certain problems of hindsight or other problems that we actually write about in a list. And then you can force the other person, knowing that these will happen, to write better stories.
Well, thanks for the answer. Maybe a quick follow-up question on that. So I'm just curious. So when you're I'm imagining you're attending a lot of different seminars. You're probably, in your personal life, professional life, listening a lot of different storytellers. So, working in this particular area of expertise, and having these conversations, writing this book, do you think, like, reading about this has changed how you're listening? Storytellers, when you're hearing them, like, are you like, oh, like when I'm listening a storyteller, I should probably question the underlying reasons? Like, do you think you have become more maybe a skeptic, or like questioning a story listener? Or
yeah, absolutely. It takes time though. It doesn't happen automatically. So it's like a muscle you build, and it happens in time, and it happens. It's a quite kind of, it's not complex at all, but when you listen to stories, you start automatically looking for certain signals.
Mm-hmm.
And one signal could be hindsight. Another signal could be, is this, mixing correlation with causation? Another signal would be, is it only based on outcomes? Another signal could be, is it only or predominantly based on survivors? Another one could be, is it, expired? Is it an old story that is no longer? So you see, on top of my head, I have these. And the more signals you notice, the more skeptical you become. So it's a very mathematical way of looking at it. It saves me, personally, a lot of time, because then I can kind of switch, or I can actually use that to build something else, or I can counter that and maybe come up with an insight that is quite different than common sense believes at that moment, based on a certain faulty story. And once you do that, when you're in a company, you become kind of a story scientist. You become testing it. If I test this, so if you get your hands dirty, you become kind of a story scientist, and you start building a better story. So you kind of get to a much better understanding of the situation. It saves me time, actually. It's quite fun. So personally, I would advise it, but it takes a little bit of a kind of practice.
Yeah, it's definitely made me more conscious about what I'm hearing, and when I'm hearing a story, then I definitely started questioning, oh, like, should I actually get the insights that the storyteller was telling? Like, does it actually fit me? Am I in the same conditions that the storyteller was mentioning? So yeah, all of those insights have definitely been helpful. I guess my concern, like, moving forward, is we have been producing the content, new storytellers, maybe at a pace that we have never seen in history, and the information and the content that the world is creating is just going crazy. So I think having this mindset is definitely going to be helpful, but in the meantime more challenging, in the sense of you'll always be conscious about what you're hearing, what you're learning, and you will always be a little bit skeptical, a little bit questioning about all of those stories. So I think it's definitely some level of work. Yeah.
Ultimately, it saves you time. It becomes a heuristic. It becomes something quite automatic. And also, it counters something that we call confirmation bias, because you inevitably get attracted to stories that kind of sound, that agree with your ideas, they sound good to you immediately. So you kind of also counter this confirmation bias quite automatically using this kind of thing, if you wish. And it doesn't take much energy after a while. You start thinking like this. Of course, writing a book, you have to be very careful. If you start with stories that lie, then you have to be very, very careful with the stories that you write. And that's crucial. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when you're writing something.
Well, again, thanks for the answer to my follow-up question. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and ask a different question that I think is also very relevant, especially for our audience today. And my question is, when judging people for new positions, when we're interviewing people for a role, or when we are considering a promotion for a key role, how do you think we can better consider their experience? How can we look at their experience and be a better judge of their experience without all of the traps that you mentioned in your presentation?
So, okay, very relevant indeed, because that's where we look at experience the most as well, when we're judging people for a position, for promotion, as you said. So there are several facets, there are several dimensions to this maybe. One thing is, again, one argument could be that we have to check kind versus wicked. What type of position is this? Is it a kind learning environment where experience is really valid? If you're hiring a tennis coach, sure. But if you're hiring a manager in a very kind of changing environment, lots of things going on, biased feedback, potentially delayed feedback, we need to adapt constantly, then maybe we have to have, again, a skeptical look at experience in the following way. I mean, we can look at, still, we shouldn't ignore experience, but the attitude may matter. Is the person we're considering, are they full of overconfident and confident because of their experience, completely basing everything on that, or they may be willing to kind of open to kind of challenge that or revise it? Would they be okay with working with people with diverse experiences and maybe unlearn and relearn certain things? So if they're skeptical of their own experience, or at least willing to let it go or change it in the upcoming adventures, in the positions that they will be, then that may be more valuable in the long run. Mm-hmm. So that could be something. Another thing is that when considering people's experience, I would also ask, if this is a person that I'm considering hiring, I would also consider certain questions beyond experience. Have you ever prevented something? What kind of a problem identification strategy are we using? Because prevention is not experienced. Everybody is a problem solver and you can prove it. But prevention is quite important too. So on top of that, maybe we can ask questions like this. And in fact, if I was a candidate, if I was somebody who was considered for a promotion or for a new position, I would also emphasize those things. I can prevent problems, and this is how I did it. This is how I do it. It's a probabilistic notion, I know, not as concrete as problem solving, but it is a valuable skill that people don't talk about much.
Again, thanks for your answer. I think there's definitely a part that I remember in your book where you talk about how we don't really put too much emphasis on actually recognizing and rewarding people in their field of expertise, preventing disasters or preventing bad business decisions. So I think it's
preventions are cursed by experience because they are non-events. They don't happen. So, we don't learn from them, but somebody has done something amazing somewhere. We don't know who they are sometimes. So that's a shame.
Yeah. Maybe, when all of this COVID-19 ends, several years later, we are going to have stories, popping up from all around the world, how maybe they have prevented, certain people to die, in different regions. So
we did that with Ebola. I mean, we did that. People prevented Ebola from coming, to our shores for decades, for years. Who are those people? We didn't even know about Ebola before it came to our shores in many countries. Mm-hmm. And many people, because they went and then prevented the outbreaks, etc. Who are those people? We don't know those people. We should reward those people, and those people actually saved a lot of lives. And the same thing happens also in business in so many different ways. Absolutely.
Probably, they should be the ones going out to events talking about how they were, able to prevent that terrible disaster before actually it's happened. Because if it happens, we would probably, look at what happened, look at what terrible things happened, and then we would probably recognize and award the people who maybe stopped it after it happens. But we definitely don't give the same recognition and
the same credit. No, we should
for the preventers.
This doesn't mean that problem solvers are not important. It's just they're rewarded more often. And by the way, the ozone depletion, the people who came up with it, the scientists, they got the Nobel Prize, so we rewarded them.
Oh, okay, that's good for them.
We can do it. That shows we can do it. We have
a good way to show appreciation, just giving a Nobel Prize. And I think we're also almost coming up our time. So if there are any more questions, I think this is a good opportunity to go ahead and ask. And it looks like we do have some questions, so we are going to see them now. So we have Pete Williamson asking, how do we learn from experience with few data points to compare failures and successes?
Good question, Pete. Thanks for the question. It's not easy. So one problem with experience is that sometimes we get only 1 or 2 data points and we think we learned it. And that happens also with success and failure. So one thing that many times I observe, and I do myself as well, when my first experience is bad, I kind of give up on it and I don't collect more data points. That's the most unfortunate thing sometimes. So what we need to do is we need to collect more data points, and we can do that in 2 ways. One, we can devise certain tests ourselves. So we can try to make certain things, even if they fail, make sure that they're recoverable failures. So that's what entrepreneurs try to do most of the time. They try to make mistakes, but in a way that they're recoverable, to collect more data. So to keep A/B testing smaller ones, to check the data more, kind of enrich the data. Secondly, second best would be to try to look for similar instances elsewhere and what the data may look like. So we may have failed in our first try and we may, be ready to give up. But then if we look and in other instances there's rich data and the failure rate is actually not that high, maybe we had this unfortunate event of early failure. So we may actually try it again, have that learning enriched. So first we can try to do some tests, because our situation may not be really the same with anyone else's. So that data may not be too relevant, maybe 100% relevant or reliable. So we can try ourselves, and second best, we may go and hunt for some data elsewhere and try to enrich what we have. But still, I would stand on the same notion that we should maybe look at we should keep looking at the difference between what went right and wrong to understand the potential causalities.
That makes sense. I think the one of the other ways that I would think about it is probably in business situations or in personal situations, there are some people who has experienced a similar problem in the past, or currently experiencing a similar problem, or has experienced way in the before and had some learning. So maybe connecting with those people and learning from their experiences, if the conditions are the same, obviously.
Yeah, I would still keep the diversity there too. If I'm interviewing people, I would interview 3 people who have diversity of experience in that field, even more than 3 if possible. And today you can reach anyone quite rapidly. So this is the best time for looking for data from diverse experiences, and that should kind of enlighten us in a healthy way. Absolutely.
Yes. And I think we can actually see the next question now. So Craig Lawson is asking, so what are the 8 things I should do for success? How do I find my 8 things?
Oh, yeah.
Very good question.
Yeah, very good question. I would first start by, thank you, Craig, by defining what success is for you. Again, this is a working definition. It may change in the future, but I still would write it down like recorded maybe a few objectives, what success means. Because something that people forget is that success has lots of trade-offs. We could judge success by also what we give up to achieve it. So your 8 things will really will depend on those definitions that you have of success. And the 8 things would be then to look at people who have similar success aims and maybe start at least with what they have conquered, what they have achieved and how they achieved it. And then you can start by maybe looking at failures and successes again, vis-a-vis your definition, and then try to understand what the differences are. And I would build those 8 things on those differences. I'm going to give a very kind of simple exercise, simple example. If your people with similar success definitions, those who failed woke up very early, and those who didn't succeeded woke up very late. Maybe start testing by waking up late. Maybe it's, the way we think about it is like we should be night owls in that case. Just this kind of simple example, but I would first define and then try to look similar examples and then try to see what makes the difference and build those 8, 9, 10, 14 if you wish. There was a 25 list that I saw the other day, so that would be it. And then once you start testing, we will be already kind of having this feedback loop where we're going to learn fast, and this will become hopefully a habit.
Well, thank you for that answer as well. I think if I were to add a personal comment, I think looking at successes and failures, we tend to ignore the luck factor or the timing factor. I remember when asked, there was a large study looking at entrepreneurs and what made them successful or what made them fail, and the largest indicator of their success and failure was also about timing. So I think maybe giving some credit to luck and timing. Absolutely. And also this is a factor, and maybe also start thinking about, or maybe how can I increase my luck in this field, yes, or in my personal life or in my professional life? How can I, maybe better evaluate the timing of what I'm planning to do or what we are planning to do as an organization? Could be an interesting.
One algorithm there is to look at the success rate. If there are lots of failures and small amount of successes, I would bet that there's lots of luck involved, because those failures are not. They're not unintelligent. If there was if they could do something before breakfast and that was making a difference, they would have done it. So I would say right time, right place makes a lot of sense in that case. So if there are lots of failures and small successes, yes, luck. The lower that success rate, the more luck plays a role, absolutely. And then you can change your strategy, get rejected a lot. Knock on many doors, start generating ideas. We also have no idea about the potential of our ideas, so we should be able to generate more ideas in those cases and not sit on them for long and start operating them and putting different seeds.
When you were sharing these thoughts, I was also thinking, alongside with running a startup, probably interviewing for a new job is probably where your failure rate is pretty high and success rate. I mean, you just end up with one job at the end, right? So yeah, that is probably an area that you might want to
yeah, and if you get rejected, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not talented, because everybody applying may be talented. So that's the common element. It doesn't make the difference. So I would get rejected and look at the commonalities around rejections. Maybe that might give you something. But one rejection in a small success rate situation doesn't mean much, actually. Don't read too much into it. Get depressed if you need to get sad for a day or two, but come back.
Have your ice cream maybe, and come back.
Maybe have an ice cream, but come back soon and repeat. Absolutely.
And we're almost time, so I want to have one last question before we wrap up our conversation. And we have Peter Tober saying, "Thank you, Emre. When analyzing and reflecting on our experiences, what are some good prompts, reflection questions we can ask ourselves so that we don't fall into these traps?"
Thank you, Peter, for the question. There are two main questions we discuss in the book. Like the whole book revolves around them, actually, that we kind of figured out that would be the least that we can do. One is what is missing, and two, what is irrelevant. So when you're thinking about disasters, for example, it is irrelevant what you're observing in the first parts because things change very quickly. That's irrelevant. What is missing, for example, in when you're learning from failures and predominantly for your failures, you can kind of pinch yourself, say, what is missing? And what is missing is in my current data set is the successes. Maybe I should put a kind of representative sample of that. So just to prompt myself to ask the right questions at the right time to my experience, I ask two simple questions. We argue that those might help you. What's missing? What's irrelevant? Of course, there are paragraphs behind this, but that is the kind of the easiest way I can summarize this when talking, when thinking, when criticizing, or having a kind of a healthy skeptical view of my experience. It is a trusted teacher. It is a very kind of dear teacher. That is precisely why we have to be careful so that we kind of distinguish when it's contaminating, when it's teaching us the wrong lessons. So we keep learning the right lessons from it. That's the main idea.
Thank you, Emre. I think you probably thought about this question that people may ask,
Okay.
and because I know reading your book, at the end of each chapter there's a section called "What's Missing, What's Irrelevant," and there are some sub questions that you can actually ask. So it took me a while to figure it out, but once I figured it out at the end of the book, I was like, oh, this is going to be really helpful, evaluating my own experience, other people's experiences, and maybe get the right insights that I need. So
it's a zipped version of the book, essentially. It's a handbook.
Little handbook for actionable insights. Well, Emre, I think we are at a time now. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. As always, I've really enjoyed it. I'm hoping that our audience also enjoyed it. All of the people working at Google from all over the world. So thank you so much, and this wraps up our conversation.